on Sky News Australia. This is the Rita Panahi Show Overtime.
Welcome to the Rita Panahi Show Overtime. Coming up today, we'll be speaking to Goldie Ghamari, a Canadian MP whose family fled the Islamists of Iran. Early now, she finds that same ideology in Canada. We'll speak to Josh Hammer about what's happening in the US, including the latest polling that shows Trump winning in those crucial swing states and winning when it comes to minorities. Didn't that disturb the folks at CNN? And there's a bumper edition of Lefties losing it. And Kinsey Schofield with all the royal news. We don't forget about Kinsey. But as always, let's start the program with the latest news with media writer for The Australian, Sophie Ellsworth. Sophie, let's start locally. Police in southwest Sydney are investigating an Islamic preacher known as Brother Ismail for his pro-Hamas comments and call for jihad. He warned the Australian public against labelling Muslims terrorists.
Wallahi, they don't love us. And they wish they can kill all of us. If the Australian government like it or not, if the ASIO likes it or not, if they want to deport me from Australia or not, the jihad is the solution for the ummah.
The Al Medina Dawah Centre, where he preaches, is so far refusing to condemn those comments, Sophie.
I found this really interesting, Rita, too, that the centre reports I read didn't even know this gentleman's, should I call him a gentleman? Probably the wrong description. They didn't know his surname, which was just bizarre. This should totally be condemned, and it's good that the police are looking at it. But what a concern.
Do we believe that they didn't know his surname?
Well, that's what they're saying,
okay.
Unless they're...
Okay.
Rita, don't be so cynical.
Yeah, I am. I'm a tad cynical when it comes to this space, given what I lived through in my childhood. Sophie, the Greens senators staged a walkout during yesterday's Senate question time in response to Labor's handling of the Israel-Hamas war. Here's Green Senator Maureen Faruqi.
I'm going to sit here and watch you pat yourselves on the back for doing nothing. Weasel words are not going to stop war crimes. Today, we bring the people's protest into Parliament. Free, free Palestine.
Thank you, Senator Faruqi. Minister Farrell, that was a statement, so... Order. Senator Hanson. Order.
What a pathetic, petulant display, Sophie, not just from Maureen Faruqi, but all those Green senators and the people who are voting for this. Have a look at what you're supporting. And what more can you say? I mean, this is disgraceful. Those images have gone around the world. People are wondering what is going on in Australia, because that's our parliament. That's not on the streets, that's the parliament.
Well, Rita, can I just point out here that this is Maureen Faruqi's modus operandi to pull stunts, and also the Greens. And she's been successful in that. As you said, it's now circulated. It's gone viral around the world. But what has it actually achieved? It's made a full Australians look like it's a mockery down here in our parliament.
It looks like our upper house is some sort of a circus.
Certainly does.
And yeah, I think a lot of eyes have been opened. I've had so many messages from members of the Jewish community in the last few days, last 3 weeks really, about how they feel towards many of the Teals, the Greens, and increasingly also some in the Labor Party. I think they're finding out who are their genuine allies and who are not there when it counts. Now, in his latest monologue, comedian, and he's a lefty comedian Bill Maher, strongly supported Israel, pointing out that the left tends to criticise a country that upholds the principles of liberal democracies in a region that's dominated by Islamic fundamentalism.
For all the progressives and academics who refer to Israel as an outpost of Western civilization like it's a bad thing, please note, Western civilization is what gave the world pretty much every goddamn liberal precept that liberals are supposed to adore. Individual liberty, scientific inquiry, rule of law, religious freedom, women's rights, human rights, democracy, trial by jury, freedom of speech. Please, somebody stop us before we enlighten again. And since one can find all these concepts in today's Israel and virtually nowhere else in the Middle East, if anything, the world would be a better place if it had more Israels. Of course, this message falls on deaf ears to the current crop who reduce everything to being only victims or victimizers, so Israel is lumped in as the toxic fruit of the victimizing West. The irony being that all marginalized people live better today because of Western ideals, not in spite of them.
Not difficult to agree with all of that. I mean, he speaks common sense, a trait that's missing from the modern left, but he's still got a bit of it.
Yeah, that's right, Rita. I mean, what he was saying was pretty sensible. Some people might be surprised what he was saying was so sensible, but shouldn't this be applauded?
Oh, absolutely. And he's one of the few who has got the guts to do that, because there'll be many in his audience who don't like hearing that, but
Absolutely.
He's happy to say it. Now, I know you like it, Bet. It's Melbourne Cup Day, so Melbourne, public holiday for a horse race. That's how we do things. Look at these odds from Sportsbet. Sportsbet, latest odds on the 2024 US presidential election. Interesting indeed. Donald Trump is now favourite to win at $2.63, while Joe Biden is $2.80. We've got a couple of outsiders there in Gavin Newsom and Nikki Haley. This obviously follows polling that I'll be discussing later in the program with Josh Hammer, but interesting result. Would you be having a punt on that, $2.63?
Oh, look, Rita, it's still a while out till this takes place.
Don't even know who our nominees are going to be.
That's right, but I certainly think Trump's got a pretty good chance. But coming up against Joe Biden, he hasn't got much competition if this does play out that way, does he?
Well, Joe would disagree with that characterisation, Sophie. That's very nasty. Now, this story, I had to double check to see if this was actually true, because it sounds too crazy, but sadly it is true. Anne Frank has become the latest figure to be a victim of cancel culture and efforts to be inclusive. A kindergarten in East Germany has decided to change its name from Anne Frank to World Explorer Kindergarten to be more inclusive. This has sparked debate amid the Israel-Hamas conflict. And so before I get your response, I want to get the commentary of my favourite parody account on Twitter, Titty McGrath, who said, "Fantastic to hear that the Anne Frank Kindergarten is being renamed to be more diverse and progressive. Which of the following would work best? Queen Latifah Day Centre, Michelle Obama Playgroup, O.J. Simpson Preschool Wonderland, or River to Sea World of Adventures?" Of course, that account is run by the very droll Andrew Doyle. But how can they do this? How can they try to erase not just history, but to see Anne Frank as not sufficiently inclusive?
We're just going to see more and more of this, Rita, where they are actually stamping out history and trying to rewrite it. And I think that's really concerning. Just erase it and move on. And we're going to see more and more of this as we go into this woke world that we live in now.
And I think I know why they're making that decision, because there might be certain demographics who are not happy with that name. Now it's time for Lefties Losing It. Let's start with minimum wage workers being shamed and complained about by this self-indulgent narcissist who is always ready to find his inner Karen.
It looks like he's having a nice feast.
She, her.
Yeah,
it's okay. It's all good.
But it was not all good.
Hi. I use she, her pronouns. I'm not sir.
Oh, so sorry.
Yeah, like it's like a knife in the heart. I did specifically ask ahead of time not to be called sir. Yeah, I'm just gonna go. Okay. The Sweetwater starts at
yes,
okay.
Sir? I'm so sorry. I apologize.
It's just always like a knife. It always hurts every single time. I was wondering if there's a manager I could talk to about something that happened. Yeah, I was called sir.
Self-obsessed, attention-seeking, cry bullies. It's a thing, cry bullies. They're the types who simultaneously play the victim but are really the bullies themselves.
Did you call me sir? I just want to tell you that the person who gave me this called me sir.
What?
Called me sir.
Oh.
Yeah. There's more.
I'm not a sir. Nothing like a good misgendering.
You. I'm not sir.
Oh, sorry.
Not sir. Not sir. But the guy who dropped the food off, he called me sir twice in a row.
Okay. I'll let him know that.
I do like the little hat on the dog. That's a nice touch. But our faux Karen there has to run to management like a good cry bully and complain that their feelings were hurt. Let's hope nobody lost their job in any of those cases. All those poor waiters, they're working hard. They're not earning much money. Can you just imagine having someone go to your manager because you accidentally misgendered them? I mean, they were also apologetic there as well in the video clips.
Oh, Rita, I'm more concerned about the dog. Why is the dog sitting at the table? And what gender is the dog? We don't know that.
We don't.
This is just crazy.
But it had a very...
has deliberately set this up so it gets the reaction. I mean, seriously, these poor waitresses and waiters have to deal with this nonsense.
It is so self-indulgent. You look at the problems around the world and to be playing victim over that. Now let's go to some late-breaking Lefties losing it news. And overnight we had this mindless madness by the usual climate change cultists.
Did not get the vote by voting. It is time for deeds and not words. It is time to just stop oil.
It's time to put these increasingly violent, destructive miscreants behind bars, and for a considerable amount of time in that case. Those two Just Stop Oil protesters have been arrested after their antics at the National Gallery in London. But sadly, Soph, they'll probably get the usual slap on the wrist. This is why they are so lawless, because there's no disincentive not to be.
That's right, Rita, and we keep seeing these repeat acts, you know, going viral on social media and really no repercussion. So why would they stop doing it? They get all the traction, they get all the publicity. That's what they want to do, and then they get a little slap on the wrist.
Someone pointed out on X, why don't they ever attack modern pieces of art? Because, you know, that possibly they wouldn't find there any resistance there. We might actually be helping them out with their bail money. Now let's go to Lefty Heartland, and that's just about any college campus nowadays, from Melbourne to London to LA. Here is Charlie Kirk remaining calm and polite as some lefty loses it big time.
You're an asshole. Would you like to have a conversation?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't like you. I think you spread hate. I think you spread bigotry. I think you piss a lot of people off because you're just an awful person. I don't think you really want to debate because you're just here to piss people off and energize your crowd of racists.
What have I ever said that's racist?
Oh, what?
Can you name one thing?
I'm Hispanic. Can I support Charlie?
Can you name
Does that mean anything?
Can you name a second thing I've ever said that's racist?
I think you're just trying to play a game, and I think this is obviously going to be used.
What have I ever
favor,
said that's
I just
hateful?
want to hate you. You're awful. Get off my campus.
When have I ever said anything that's hateful? Have a nice day. He can't say anything I've ever said that's racist, because I've never said anything that's racist. That is the American left in one picture, everybody. Lots of rage and no wisdom.
So he accuses Charlie of spreading hate and racism, but cannot name a single incident of Charlie actually doing that. He ignores the man of colour who says, I support Charlie, and then ends the tantrum by walking off in a huff. And it's on brand for Lefties losing it. He just ticks every box there for us, Sophie.
He does, Rita. I mean, where's the evidence? He just stood there and sort of, well, I don't
Get
know.
off my campus.
Exactly, and then wandered away when he knew he had no argument.
We've got some pro-Hamas rally to organise, presumably. I mean, give me a break. Now to two lefties losing it, and frankly, I don't know who is worse here. The racist woman, Yaba Blay, saying all white people are guilty and no amount of reparations will change that, or the silly fool nodding along.
White people, I need you to know that your money will not assuage you from your guilt. You cannot pay your way out of this. There aren't enough reparations in the world that you can pay us. And so you think because you write a check or you slide me something in Venmo that you're absolved and you can tell somebody, well, I gave Dr. Blay $100. I'm not racist. Dr. Blay is going to spend your $100 and still tell you that you're racist. Thank you.
That's awesome.
That's awesome. My God. By the way, that's former US soccer player Abby Wambach nodding along like a self-loading simpleton. Talk about a struggle session there. It's just sitting there nodding along saying, yep, no matter what we do, no matter what I've personally done, nothing's going to get rid of this white guilt.
It's all really quite pathetic, Rita, wasn't it? I just watching that going, what am I watching here? I still don't know where you find these videos, Rita.
Oh, there's so much. I mean, this segment could go for a full hour every day. Now, here's footage of a Palestinian protester approaching Billboard Chris. We've spoken to him on this program. He does great work. She waves her flag stick right in his face. It's tantamount to assault, but see what happens with the London constabulary here. The police blame the victim and accuse him of breaching the peace.
Why are you here?
I'm here to have conversations. Don't put that in my face.
Why are you here? Why are you here? Why are you here?
I'm here to have conversations.
Why are you being offensive? He needs to go.
Do you want to move over there? Yeah, sure.
For your own
I'm
safety.
just standing here.
For your own safety. Come on. Come on.
I'm allowed to stand here.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you to move away for your own safety.
Move away
Because they're obviously quite aggravated with you, aren't they?
Okay, so now I'm standing here. So now where do you want me to go?
Back over a bit further and I'll have a chat with you.
Like onto the street?
Yeah, just go over onto that island there and I'll have a chat with you.
Okay. So you're telling me I'm not allowed to stand on this public street?
I'm telling you at the moment, I'm moving you over there to prevent the breach of the peace. Come on, come over there and let's have a chat.
Wait a minute. People coming and getting in my face means I'm breaching the peace?
You're causing them to do that, aren't you? So
how am I doing that?
Move over and I'll have a chat with you over here.
How am I causing them to do that?
Well, I don't know what you're doing, but you were getting extremely hostile.
They're getting hostile with me. I've got it all on video.
Okay, that's fine. And you've got me on video?
Yeah.
All right, so this is for your safety, because when I walked past, there was a large group of people who were very angry with you.
Blaming the victim. We see this again and again in the UK. Their policing is utterly rotten. It's broken. And Sophie, what's even more disturbing is they've got to this state under more than 10 years of Tory rule. Imagine if Labor were in, which looks like they're going to be in any time, what the state of policing is going to look like in a decade.
It's pretty concerning, Rita, to watch that footage. And
it's not isolated. There is incidents we highlight.
This is a regular
regularly.
occurrence, and I suspect if Keir Starmer is PM, we'll see more of this.
The cops, it's mob rule. The people who are more likely to become animated and violent, they get pandered to. Now let's go to the US, to Dr. Anthony Fauci, a lefty losing it, who is now lying to the public about advocating for harmful lockdowns.
First of all, I didn't recommend locking anything down. And the record will show, Neil, that we didn't recommend shutting everything down. I recommended to the president that we shut the country down.
Oh, Sophie, we all would like to rewrite parts of history, but alas, there's plenty of evidence of Fauci advocating for...
Has he got memory loss, Rita?
Well, it's very selective memory loss that many people...
How can we forget what we went through? The whole world went through.
And he was at those daily press conferences for a long time, and then he complained that the lockdowns weren't strict enough because states like Florida and Texas were not abiding by those recommendations. Now, let's go back to those anti-Israel protesters. Some of them have turned their hate on McDonald's patrons, and watch them abuse those leaving a restaurant including a young child being carried by his father. Soph, it's a strange state of affairs where you can't go to McDonald's with your kid to have a Happy Meal without having to run through that rabble.
That's right, Rita. If you're just going for a cheeseburger or a Big Mac with your family, you should be able to do it in peace and harmony. It's really concerning that we see that, and we're seeing more of this around the world. I mean, how low is society got that we're getting to this point?
Well, I think it's got to do a little bit with the previous clip we showed of what was happening in London with the police blaming the victims. The bullies are being emboldened, and this is what you get. Sophie Ellsworth, always a pleasure.
Thank you, Rita.
My next guest is an Iranian-Canadian politician from Ontario who gave a speech that went viral recently. Goldie Ghamari spoke out about how her family escaped Iran after the Islamic Revolution turned the country into an Islamist hellhole, particularly for women. Her family sought and were granted refuge in Canada, but in a speech that's been shared far and wide, particularly by members of the Jewish community, she spoke of how she's seeing signs of that ugly ideology she fled in the West, in Canada, where even before Israel's counteroffensive, crowds gathered to celebrate Hamas's horrific attack against Israeli civilians on October 7. Let's have a look.
When my parents immigrated to Canada in 1986, I was a year old. And the reason that they immigrated to Canada from Iran is because in 1979 there was an Islamic revolution, and our once free and democratic country was taken over by radical Islamists, was taken over by terrorists, and was taken over by fascists. And we were blessed to be able to come to Canada to escape that hatred, to escape that radical, fundamentalist, Islamo-fascist ideology. And that's the same regime, Madam Speaker, that denies the Holocaust. That's the same regime that spreads anti-Semitic information and propaganda, not just inside the Islamic regime of Iran, but around the world, and through its proxies like Hamas and Hezbollah and others. And I happened to come across this pro-Hamas celebration, this pro-Hamas rally. It was the first time in my life that I had ever felt uncomfortable as a Canadian. The hate, the anger, the way they were marching, the chants they were making, that's something you see in the Islamic regime in Iran. You do not see that in Canada. That's the kind of behavior you see in radical fundamentalist countries, not in Canada. That is not the Canada that my parents immigrated to. That is not the Canada that we were raised in.
Goldie Ghamari joins me now. Goldie, has Canada changed? Have you imported and fostered the same ideology your parents fled?
Well, hi, Rita. Thank you so much for having me on, first of all, and thank you to everyone who's watching and listening. So the Canada that my parents immigrated to in 1986, I feel like it's not the same Canada that we're witnessing today. My parents came here to escape a radical Islamofascist ideology. They came here because they wanted to live in a free, democratic, and secular society. And growing up, we had no problem integrating into Canadian society. My parents embraced Canadian values. My parents embraced Canadian culture and secularism, and the Canadian ideas and ideology and beliefs that we respect everyone. We're here to be Canadian first and foremost, and we are here because we want to be peaceful, and we want to live our lives free of government control. And it doesn't mean that you have to forget about your heritage or your language or your culture or your customs, but what it means is that you leave the hatred and the baggage of your home country behind, because we come here to live in a peaceful, democratic society.
Absolutely. And Goldie, we've seen these anti-Israeli rallies around Canada, around the Western world. We've seen posters of kidnapped children torn down. And in Canada and elsewhere, we've seen the flag of Hamas's biggest backers, the Iranian regime, flying high. And this footage of thousands of Muslims lining the streets of Toronto to pray together was highlighted by another MP, an Iranian Belgian this time, Daria Safai, whose family, like yours and mine, escaped Iran. And she said what looks peaceful and innocent is, she said, a political and social message. She called it a power display. And she also noted the strict gender apartheid that means there are no women among that groups. What's your response to that? Is that something that should be concerning Canadians, these overt displays of people praying in the street?
100%. Absolutely. This should be very concerning. It is concerning to me. It is concerning to many Iranian Canadians. It is concerning to the Iranian diaspora around the world. So we have been sharing footage of the protests within Iran. And one of the ways that the terrorist Islamic regime in Iran, this Islamo-fascist regime, responds to pro-democracy Iranians within Iran who are fighting for freedom and democracy is they will take over their spaces and they will pray in front of them. And for a lot of people, they'll think, oh, well, they're praying, they're being peaceful, but it's not. This is a sign of conquest. This is a sign of power. And it is very concerning and it is very frightening to see these radical Islamo-fascist ideologies abusing the freedoms and the charter, like within Canada, for example, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Canadian Constitution, to say that, oh, what's the problem? We're just praying on the street. No, you're not praying on the street. You are participating in an unsanctioned rally. You are blocking traffic. You are taking over the streets. You are not allowing peaceful Canadians to just walk through and use public spaces. And you are using this as a tool of colonialization and conquering within this radical Islamo-fascist ideology. And the really frustrating part is that when the Iranian diaspora speaks out about this, we're accused of being Islamophobic, we're accused of being racist, and it's not that at all. Like, this is the reality of Iranians. This is the literal reason why we came to Canada. It's to escape that terrorist flag you see right there, that Allahu Akbar flag, which has nothing to do with Iran. We fly the lion and sun flag. There's a reason that Iranian women were named, were given the Nobel Peace Prize. There's a reason that Iranian women were named the Time Hero of the Year by Times Magazine. There's a reason that Sherbin Hajipour won that award within the Oscars. People realize this, and yet the fact that we're seeing this radical Islamo-fascist ideology sort of ingrained within Western democracies is very concerning, not to us, but it should be very concerning to everyone who lives in Canada, Australia, United States, and in European countries.
There has been this bizarre alliance between the left and Islamists, which is, I think, going to end in tears for everybody, including the left eventually. Meanwhile, Goldie, you've got your Prime Minister there, Justin Trudeau, who's still refusing to label Iran's Revolutionary Guard a terrorist organisation. Tell me about his response to this crisis and, more broadly, how the country has changed under his reign.
So I know the Iranian Canadian diaspora has been calling for years to asking Justin Trudeau to list the IRGC as a terrorist entity, and he still refuses to do so. I'm sure you're aware of Ukraine flight PS752, which was shot down by the terrorist Islamic regime back in January of 2020. And that flight, when it was shot down by the Islamic regime in Iran, initially they denied it for 3 days. They initially said that this was just propaganda from the United States and Canada, by the way. And it was only when social media footage came out from Iranians within Iran that the Islamic regime finally had to concede that they were the ones who shot down this passenger flight, which killed 55 Canadian Iranians and also 30 permanent residents, Iranian permanent residents living in Canada, as well as, all 176 innocent passengers on board. And literally 1 month later, Prime Minister Trudeau was seen meeting with Zarif, who was the foreign affairs minister at the time, shook his hand, bowed his head to this Islamic regime terrorists, and pretended like everything was okay. And that was just such a huge insult to Iranian Canadians, because he is just so tone deaf. And he marches in our rallies, he chants, he's angry, he calls out the Islamic regime, and yet he's the prime minister and he does absolutely nothing about it. And it's very shameful to see this kind of behavior from the prime minister of a country that is supposed to stand up for freedom and democracy.
And yet we saw how he reacted to the truckers' protest and the manner in which those men mainly were attacked. There's so much to talk about. Goldie Ghamari, thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate it. Joining me now is royal commentator and host of the To Die For Daily podcast, Kinsey Schofield. Kinsey, Prince Harry and Meghan were spotted enjoying some kid-free VIP treatment as they attended a Katy Perry concert over the weekend, partying with a A-list company. They travelled to Las Vegas in a private jet, of course, along with Hollywood celebrities like Cameron Diaz, and were later seen with Celine Dion. Is this essentially their full-time jobs now, Kinsey, travelling on private jets to catch up with Beyonce and Katy Perry and Elton John or whoever else is around?
Rita, there's so much to unpack here. First of all, I think you're being very generous calling one of the members of Good Charlotte A-lister. God bless you. And the irony that one of their most famous songs goes, lifestyles of the rich and famous, always complaining, always complaining. Is that not Harry and Meghan's theme song?
Yes.
I mean, it's astonishing, right? But I think that there's so much to unpack. Remember, Katy Perry and Meghan were allegedly at war at some point because of Katy Perry's comments about Meghan Markle's wedding dress to Entertainment Tonight. You and I both know there's not a bridge that Meghan Markle hasn't poured gasoline on. From what I understand here in the States, it's Orlando Bloom that is trying to initiate this friendship because he feels guilty about his portrayal as Prince Harry in an HBO Max very short-lived comedy called The Prince. So it's Orlando Bloom that feels sort of guilt and sympathy, and it wants to initiate this relationship. Now, what's in it for Meghan Markle? Because Meghan Markle doesn't do anything that she doesn't seem feels like there's some sort of benefit in it for her. I'll tell you what it is. Meghan has been watching Taylor Swift. Meghan loves these visuals of Taylor Swift and her girl gang, Sophie Turner, Blake Lively, Ryan Reynolds, Hugh Jackman, and Meghan is desperate to have the same type of visual. So yes, she's going to jump on a private plane, despite preaching that we all need to watch our environmental footprint. Meghan is jumping on private planes with Cameron and hobnobbing with Celine Dion because she watches Taylor Swift and is desperately trying to claim some of that, just universal love that Taylor has.
Well, whatever you think of Taylor Swift, the girl actually works. She writes songs, she performs, she tours the world. She's got meaningful employment, which I'm not sure we can say about Meghan right now. Kinsey, the Daily Express reports Prince Harry's split with the royal family could be beyond repair. What more can you tell us about this report?
Absolutely. Now, this is coming from an amazing royal author named Tom Quinn, who makes a lot of comparisons to Prince Harry and, his uncle, who abdicated, left the royal family for an American divorcee. what I found out over the weekend, I was at a polo event with the Wales polo team. So a lot of people watching, a lot of people there that are personal friends with the royal family said the exact same thing, that they are so shocked by Harry's betrayal, that they have no idea what he's capable of at this point in time because they can't believe what they've witnessed so far, and that there really is no room for reconciliation. And that is what they were telling me over the weekend. So, you know, I believe Tom Quinn in this instance, that maybe Harry has gone too far.
I would not be surprised. I mean, there's only so much damage you can inflict on your family, particularly when you know they can't hit back. They can't make statements against you and defend themselves before those bridges are gone. Then they can't be rebuilt. Now, Omid Scobie is the unofficial mouthpiece of Harry and Meghan, has launched an astonishing attack on the royal family in promotional material for his new book, Endgame. It's set to be released later this month. The book is described as, and I quote, a penetrating investigation into the current state of the British monarchy and unpopular king, a power-hungry heir to the throne, a queen willing to go to dangerous lengths to preserve her image, and a prince forced to start a new life after being betrayed by his own family. Sounds like Harry wrote that description, except, I don't know, the writing is too coherent. This sounds astonishing. Scobie claims he's interviewed members of the royal family for this book. Would anyone other than Harry and Meghan talk to this character?
Well, first of all, Rita, I think you'll agree with me that Omid Scobie and penetrating should never be in the same sentence together. I'm personally offended, and I don't know who I need to report to. But yeah, I think if he can claim that he talked to any member of the royal family, it would be Prince Harry or Meghan Markle. No one else. This guy's credibility is in the gutter. I don't know of anybody that would.
He's no investigative journalist.
Correct. And just this idea that William is a power-hungry heir, you have studied the royal family for a very long time, too. We've heard that William is the reluctant heir to the throne. He didn't want to be king. He's been criticized for years upon years about how he's not contributed enough to the monarchy and isn't working enough as a member of the royal family. You're telling me that this guy is a tyrant? Nice try.
Absolutely. And talking about fantasy novels, Meghan is reportedly ready to tell her story in print. Why should Harry and Scobie have all the fun? According to royal biographer Tom Bower, Meghan's upcoming memoir will undoubtedly settle some scores from her point of view. Oh, no, Kinsey, don't tell me there's another book. I don't know if I can deal with just the audio book. And I'm still scarred by Harry and the 1,000 references to his todger.
I can't pass an Elizabeth Arden stand without cringing a little. There's a little piece of me that dies inside every time I pass a mall kiosk. I love Tom Bower, but Rita, I have to disagree with him on this. Meghan does not have a happy ending yet. Meghan does not have that happily ever after. If you think about Britney Spears' book, Britney discusses the conservatorship, and the climax of that book is, I escaped, I got away, I found happiness on the other side of this very traumatic experience. Meghan is made fun of on Family Guy and on South Park. Meghan, what does she do? She goes to concerts. She changes her phone number after she meets her dream guy, and neither one of them talk to their families. There is no climax for Meghan Markle that's positive. Her life, it really is still so unwritten. So what could she possibly write that would have that happy ending?
Kinsey, let's move away from royal news for a second. The great Joe Rogan's contract is up with Spotify and he holds all the cards. The New York Post is reporting he may leave for another platform, potentially joining Elon Musk's X, formerly Twitter, once his contract expires next year. The Joe Rogan Experience podcast signed an exclusive licensing deal with Spotify in 2020 for a reported $200 million. And as Spotify reduces costs with Rogan's contract ending, industry experts suggest he has significant leverage here in deciding his next move.
That's right. And, that $200 million is a lot of money. But when you have 11 million listeners, you could leave, as some have suggested, create your own media company, and now you're making half $1 billion. So there's so much potential for him. He does hold all of the cards. We hear that Audible/Amazon, they're going to fight for him. Elon Musk absolutely loves him in the same category he loves Tucker Carlson. So Elon will likely make a bid for him as well. I'm curious to see what he does, because really there's no reason for him to stay at Spotify. He could be his own boss. He could run his own show and, make billions of dollars versus millions.
Well, it's extraordinary because he is almost uncancelable. They've tried to cancel him so many times, particularly during COVID, and he just gets him more listeners. The audience grows every time they try to cancel him because people see through the gaslighting and the fake news. And you're right, Elon Musk does seem to have a soft spot for him. He was on his podcast just recently. Kinsey Schofield, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Joining me now is Senior Editor-at-Large at Newsweek, Josh Hammer. Josh, the New York Post is reporting former President Donald Trump has lashed out during his $250 million civil fraud trial in Manhattan, accusing the judge, Arthur Engoron, of fraud and labelling State Attorney Letitia James a hack. Well, yeah, that's true. Trump reportedly began his testimony calmly but lost his cool when the judge threatened to throw him out for making speeches on the stand. What more can you tell us about what's happened in the past few hours, Josh?
Yeah, so there's a lot of moving parts to unpack here, Rita. So first and foremost, perhaps most important, this is a ridiculous lawsuit. I mean, this is an utterly absurd. This is a civil lawsuit. This is not a criminal prosecution. They're essentially operating on a legal theory that maybe it's not even a gimmick. I mean, maybe using some numbers for purposes of appraisal of real estate instead of certain other numbers, which, by the way, happens essentially every time that anyone who owns any property has to pay taxes. You're going to go with the most favorable numbers. It's basically everyone who does this. This is ubiquitous in America. Yeah. This is not criminal conduct whatsoever. They're essentially saying that this is reason enough for the Trump organization to implode and shut down. It's utterly absurd, and it's doubly absurd, I think, when you think about the fact that Tish James herself, the Attorney General of New York State, who Donald Trump is correctly calling a hack, it's doubly absurd when you bear in mind that she, much like the Soros-backed prosecutor Alvin Bragg in Manhattan in New York City, they both ran on explicit platforms, Rita, telling people on the campaign trail that they were going to try to get Trump after they were elected. If that is not the most un-American thing imaginable, I mean, our Constitution explicitly says that there shall be no laws singling out any individuals. Kind of the same thing here. I mean, yes, it's campaign rhetoric, so it's technically legally saying it's basically the same concept here. Very un-American stuff. Here's what I will say on the other side of the equation, though, Rita. If I were one of Donald Trump's lawyers, I would try to encourage him to just deal with this. I mean, it's going to get dismissed, probably not at the trial level because this judge is very biased, but at an appeal level, the New York State appellate courts tend to be a little more legally serious here. So I would encourage him to, just try to answer the questions. I know this is a fraud. This is ridiculous. It's a whole stunt, but just try to get it over with, and then we can move on to the actual election.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I think people need to know that these are politically motivated persecutions, you could call them. And if you've got not just activist DAs, but activist judges, then the entire justice system is called into question. No wonder faith in the justice system has plummeted in the US, and it's cases like this that are just going to highlight the problems there. So now I'm not sure I agree that he should just behave himself and not call this woman a hack when she is one. He's facing more than 90 indictments, and we're officially 1 year away from the presidential election. And despite all this, or maybe partly because of it, the latest polls show Donald Trump charging ahead of Joe Biden in several key seats, what is shaping up to be a repeat of the 2020 showdown. The latest New York Times Siena College poll is found that Joe Biden not only trails Donald Trump nationally, and also amongst independents by quite a big margin amongst independents. But Biden is now losing to Trump in 5 of the 6 battleground states. And as the New York Times notes, in a remarkable sign of a gradual racial realignment between the two parties, the more diverse the swing state, the further Mr. Biden was behind. And he led only in the whitest of the 6. That's quite a turn up for the books, isn't it, Josh? We've been told for years that not only is Donald Trump unelectable, but minorities hate him.
You know, it's funny, Rita, if you look at the broader realignment that has been happening in American politics, really kind of picking up in earnest in the 2016 election, the Democratic Party was used to operating for a solid 15 to 20 year period there from kind of the Bill Clinton presidency, certainly kind of reaching its apex during the Barack Obama presidency. They were used to operating where their coalition was essentially a coalition of the aggrieved. It was kind of an intersectional identity politics interest group coalition, with the exception of perhaps some overeducated, New York City, Upper West Side, New York Times reading liberal white PhDs. But with the exception of that, it was very much trying to kind of pick up a very high percentage of the black vote, very high percentage of the Hispanic vote, very high percentage of the illegal alien vote, to the extent illegal aliens are voting, which they obviously should not be doing there. So anytime that you see one of these intersectional entities, these subgroups that are peeling away from the Democrats toward the Republicans, that is cause for absolutely massive concern for the Democratic Party. Black voters have been slowly, especially young black males under the age of 40. I think the percentage of those voters that Trump got in 2020 was over 20%, possibly as high as nearly 25% or so. Hispanic voters, based on all data that we've seen recently, look like they're going to be going even more towards Republicans now than they have been in the past. The most interesting thing that's happened within that kind of intersectional kind of coalition management, Rita, is the Muslim American vote, because the Muslim American vote has actually been souring quite a bit on Joe Biden over the past month or so. Because at least at the beginning of the war in the Middle East, he was very rhetorically supportive of Israel. He's starting to pare that back a little bit because there's a large Arab population in Michigan in particular, and he can't afford to lose Michigan. But all of this combined amounts to something closely approximating a 5-alarm fire for the Democratic Party, which is why you've seen David Axelrod, Barack Obama's chief advisor this weekend. You saw Joe Biden's own 2020 campaign manager starting to sound the alarm. I personally, Rita, think that Democrats are stuck with Joe Biden, whether they want to be stuck with him or not, because I don't think that they're going to be able to just sweet talk him into not running for re-election. Bear in mind, recall, this is someone who has wanted to be president for 50 years. He got to D.C. as a senator in the early 1970s. Yeah. He first ran for president in 1988. He finally has it, and now what? You're going to tell him to not run for re-election? Of course, if he steps aside, then their presumptive choice, naturally, would be the vice president, Kamala Harris. The problem with Kamala Harris is that she's less popular than venereal disease. She is wildly unpopular. She is grossly incompetent. Her office leaks like a sieve. I think a lot of Democratic elites in the media, in the chattering class, would like Gavin Newsom to get up there, but how you leapfrog Kamala Harris while maintaining black support, again, I don't think that that's a needle that can be thread here. So I think they're really stuck with Joe Biden, which is great news for Republicans.
It is great news indeed, especially when you're looking at only 23% of the country saying that the US is heading in the right direction. The polling on that is, again, remarkable. Now, you mentioned former US President Barack Obama. There he's weighed in on the conflict between Israel and Hamas, the man who enriched and emboldened Hamas's biggest backers, Iran, thinks we're all complicit in what's happening now. Let's have a listen.
What Hamas did was horrific, and there's no justification for it. And what is also true is that the occupation and what's happening to Palestinians is unbearable. Nobody's hands are clean. That all of us are complicit to some degree.
Josh, the chutzpah there is weapon grade.
Let me try to translate roughly what you just heard Barack Obama say. A translation of that would be, what Hitler did at Auschwitz and Treblinka was really bad, but, he happened to own a dog, so he's probably not all that bad, right? He actually probably had some nice quality. That basically is what Barack Obama just said. The Hamas Holocaust of October 7th, Rita, was the single deadliest day for the Jewish people since the death of Hitler and the defeat of Nazi Germany in 1945. It is a day that for Israel, for the Jewish people, frankly, I would argue for the Western world's broader fight against radical Islamic terrorism, it is a day that, to paraphrase FDR, will live in infamy. And to kind of try to both sides this thing, while the blood is still dry, while all the bodies in the kibbutzes near the border with Gaza have literally to this day not yet been fully identified because they were so grossly disfigured, the bones, the shrapnel, while, by the way, well over 200 hostages remain in the subterranean terror tunnels in Gaza, those Hamas-controlled terror tunnels. We think roughly 15 to 20, at least, of those hostages are American citizens. This is a former president of the United States. While there are, 15, 20 American hostages currently being held in the worst American hostage crisis since, as you alluded to, the 1979 Tehran hostage crisis, to have a former president get up there and try to both sides this thing, it's nothing short of disgusting. But unfortunately for, Barack Obama, it's par for the course. As you said, this is a man who filled the coffers of the world's #1 leading state sponsor of jihadism. That, of course, is the head of the snake, the Iranian regime. This is someone whose entire Middle East geopolitics was based on undermining our allies, such as Israel, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Egypt, and bolstering our enemies, such as Iran and the Muslim Brotherhood. It's horrific, horrific stuff. He obviously should know better. Based on, he's a reasonably well-educated man. He should know better. The problem, of course, is that, as Dennis Prager once said, where you have an overabundance of education and you have a whole lot of knowledge, there not necessarily is a lot of corresponding wisdom to match that knowledge.
And you contrast his reign and the current Biden administration. Some would argue this is Obama's third term. You contrast that with the 4 years of Trump, the Abraham Accords, relationships being normalised between Israel and a number of Muslim-majority countries, night and day. Now, before I let you go, Josh, tens of thousands of pro-Palestinian, or you can call them anti-Israeli protesters, gathered in Washington on the weekend. They smeared red paint on the gates of the White House. They tried to scale the walls. They chanted all sorts of slogans. And they also desecrated monuments, covered statues in graffiti. Let's just have a look at the reaction of one man who was there in the aftermath and was understandably sickened by what he saw.
They have raised the Palestinian flag on the grounds of the White House at Lafayette Park, and walk around with me. Look at this. I've never been so outraged. They've raised the Palestinian flag and more graffiti. More graffiti. Look at this. Free Palestine. You see this? Free Palestine. And look at this sign. Look at this sign.
Decolonise Palestine, decolonise the United States, reads the sign. Joshua, tell me about how authorities handle this lawlessness.
Well, real quick, Rita, let's address that sign on its own merits or lack thereof, as the case may be, because it's actually deeply illustrative. The same people that are calling Israel an apartheid state, that are trying to quote unquote free Palestine from the river to the sea, as they say, which is in essence a call for the extermination of the Jews. It's a call for a second Holocaust. The same people that are calling that also want an end to the United States of America. It really is just two sides of the exact same coin. It's not an accident, of course, that in Tehran, our #1 arch geopolitical foe, they chant death to America and death to Israel. America is the big Satan, Israel the little Satan. If you think that Israel is a colonizing force, ironically, as the case may be, despite the fact that the Jews were, by definition, the first inhabitants, that's why they call it Judea, that's where the word Jew comes from. If you think that America is a colonizing force, you probably think the exact same thing of Israel and vice versa. So everything is up and down. It's all just horrific there. My take when I saw this happen over the weekend, Rita, was, I thought that we just established a precedent earlier this year when it came to Special Counsel Jack Smith's indictments of former President Trump. Isn't this insurrectionary behavior when you're there at the White House, kind of pounding to get in, painting in blood red the gates of the White House there? I'm pretty sure when I was in law school, we learned that equal prosecution across the rule of law was one of the tenets of a just and sound rule of law. What's good for the goose has to be goose for the gander, unless, of course, you're living in a two-tier system of justice. Conservatives have been saying for many years that is exactly what is happening before our very own eyes. And unfortunately, unless these people are prosecuted the exact same way that all the January 6th trespassers were prosecuted, and I don't think that's going to happen, Rita, but unless that happens, it's just yet another data point in this very, very long and inglorious litany of data points evincing the two-tier nature of America's current fallen system of justice.
Well said, Josh Hammer. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks, Rita.